kidding about starting a few minutes late. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting of the Zoning Advisory Council to order. We don't have a quorum in the room, so we can't vote in those virtually, but we will move ahead with our agenda until we hopefully get a. So I will start by calling the roll. Andrew Bunn.
Present.
Riley Champagne.
Here.
Wayne Friedel. Tiffany Gunn. Philip Hart. Preston Lloyd.
Here.
Eric Mai. Charlie Menges.
Here.
Jennifer Mullen. Casey Overton. Maritza Peachin. Damian Pitt. Councilwoman Robertson.
Yeah.
Melissa Savenko. Brian White.
Here.
Charlie Wilson.
Here.
And as I mentioned, we have a few requests to participate virtually. Once we have a quorum in the room, we will vote those in to participate virtually, but for now, we'll take a pause on that. We will go ahead and open with our public comment period. It looks like we have a lengthy agenda today. We have a lot to discuss. So this is the time for the public to comment on items that are not on the agenda. We're going to limit public comment to up to 3 minutes per person, but we will be holding to that 30-minute time frame. So we'll reserve 15 minutes for those in the room and 15 minutes for those participating virtually so that we can get everyone. And we absolutely want to hear from everyone. But if you just remember to be succinct, and if someone's already offered your comments, maybe just briefly echo them so that we can keep this moving on and make sure that we get everyone's opportunity to speak. So with that, we'll open up the public comment. For those in the room, if you would like to offer comment, if you could come forward to the podium and offer your name. That'd be great, just to keep it moving. Sure. Thank you. Good afternoon.
My name is Kevin Casati. I apologize. I think I have heat exhaustion, so if I drop. Jeez.
Yeah.
I was raised urban and rural, and we have a saying in the country, where my rights end, your rights begin. But with that, we acknowledge there are things that go beyond fence borders. Community resources of water, air, sunlight, and the right to have peace and quiet, not industrial clamor. Harm not thy neighbor. Just because a creek runs through my farm, I can't let my cows foul what provides neighbors drinking water. And it's the same in the city. We must protect our shared natural resources. Maintain today's unbuilt yard percentages to protect soil and trees. What is an acceptable reduction of trees for our community to thrive? None. While my neighborhood is built up, my nearby neighbors' more generous yards compensate for my density. And to further concrete soil there hurts us all. We need Randolph, Bird Park, Maymont, and Carillon's yards for us all to breathe. We want affordable housing, so keep ADUs at 500 square feet because they rent for less. 1,200 is the size of many homes and neighborhoods and will concrete the remaining soil and trees my neighborhood lacks. Enforce shadow modeling, so existing communities' health and utility costs benefit from every hour of sunlight they now have. What is an acceptable portion of sunlight we should be taking from our neighbors? None. Respect neighborhoods as cultural resources. They provide jobs and income. Church property would not exist without the consent and investment from generations of their neighbors. State law mandates independent churches' remaining funds be donated to the community or a nonprofit. And so too should their property for uses that benefit that community. Mixed use should be on commercial streets, not residential. Why? Because Broad is a half block away. Families deserve peace, quiet, and the health benefits of no restaurant rats or allergy triggers. We can already walk to Commerce. Residential should remain residential. Zoning would literally bring health issues to our homes with Code Refresh. Neighborhoods want neighbors. Keeping 3 unrelated means roommate situations that last longer, ensuring renters stay, preventing overcrowding, and maintaining even tempers. Just like cows who defecate in their stream, Code Refresh wants neighborhood pastures where we've put in years of hard work to thrive. In short, I believe in property rights. I'm a gun-toting, butchering farm girl who put up 150 bales of hay yesterday. But I understand I can do things only if it does not harm my neighbors. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Cassandra Ziegler, and I live in the Greater Fulton. Well, actually, my property is in Greater Fulton. My children will reside there. One is already there and one to come. Greater Fulton, if you don't know about it, is sits between the Blue Atlas Restaurant and Gilpin Court. Couldn't be more tale of two cities. They're very, very different. And when we look at my neighborhood, it's got a lot of the things that I always imagined. I came from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We had not quite bodegas, but we had corner stores. We had the neighborhood itself. We had the dive bar. We had it all. And it's a very organic way of living in an urban environment. And that has it's kind of being, it's not a story that's being told. It's being kind of put on the back burner, not focused on, because people want, of course, quiet. They want a separation, but this is a very nature of how people have lived in urban neighborhoods for generations. And in addition to that, as an urban dweller from, forever, I know that density is something that we've always managed wisely. We have intergenerational households. We have grandmothers and mothers and children. So this count on how, this technicality about, are we counting how many people live in a house and how many people are unrelated to one another, is very cold to me. And because in fact, the actuality and the nature of caregiving and caring for your neighbors, caring for your family require flexibility. And the more stringent you make these rules, the less flexibility people have. Right now, we are looking at a situation where I kind of see it like, how rap and music came to be where everybody found it to be acceptable. And once it got to be acceptable, it got out of our hands. The same thing happened with cannabis. Once it became acceptable, it got out of our hands. So never mind that there's, house people in prison for selling cannabis, but now everybody and their uncle, sells cannabis and has that. So this thing that we're doing has to make certain that the very people who always lived in this urban environment enjoy it as much as you who are new to it enjoy it. So a lot of the voices I hear are coming from places with good intentions, but I don't think you'll necessarily understand all of the facets of living in an urban environment, including the fact that Richmond doesn't have a whole lot of industry. I guess there are some spots where there might be some, but there's not a great amount of work for people other than service work. There's only so much money you can make as a service worker. And if you're historically lived in Richmond, your income is impacted by the nature of rules and regulations far beyond your own scope of understanding.
Did you wrap up your?
Yes, I just want to say that as you think of this, think of the people who have always been here, the limitations of their income to the affordability issue, the sustainability issues, and the other issues you have around the code switch.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Lainey Sullivan. I am the founder of Fonticello Food Forest, which is a community garden and food pantry in Southside. I'm also the founder of Earth Folk Collective, which is a sustainable housing group in Southside as well. And 2 weeks ago, we are also at Earth Folk Collective. We have purchased some of this wooded lot. There's about eight total acres of forest. This is like off Bainbridge Street, so it's very close to the city. And there's just this amazing historic pocket of woods that we've with our friends have purchased 3 parcels of and are putting in a conservation easement. But one of the parcels was purchased by a developer, and 2 weeks ago, the developer completely clear cut everything in the forest. It was over an acre, it was about an acre and a half of woods. And we got in a conflict with them because they had said that they would keep certain trees, and we had trees on the line that we have under our conservation, and so it got really contentious. And what, through my process, we wrote a formal letter to the planning department asking that some kind of tree protections happen on that within that project. But the project had already been approved, and it was told to me that it was by right. And so all this to say, obviously, what we have right now in zoning doesn't do anything to protect any trees. And I would love to see code refresh actually protect trees, especially, I know that legislatively in the General Assembly, that what you're allowed to do as a municipality is limited, and the mature tree protections didn't get passed. But I know that there are cities like Williamsburg that have heritage tree protections. And I know that there are ways that you can measure the calipers or the diameters of the trunks of the trees. And then depending on how old the tree is, there's like a more severe penalty for cutting down that tree. And that money would go into a tree fund to preserve more urban forest that already is existing, or to plant new trees. I feel like the mentality around trees so far has been like, we'll just plant more trees. It's not a big deal. But as an environmentalist and someone working in the environmental field for many, many years, that there is such a vast difference between 100-year-old oak tree and 25-year-old trees even. The ecosystem that it supports, the shade that it creates in our communities, the water that it absorbs, like the forests are such important vital resources for our community. And like the forest that we are protecting through investing our own personal capital is stabilizing the heat in our whole entire neighborhood. And so I just want to encourage you as you move forward. I think environmentalists, especially, many of us are also housing advocates. And so we want to see both. We want to see density and environmental protections. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, good afternoon.
My name's Summer Anderson. I'm a mom of a middle schooler in the fan, and I'm a renter. I rent a bedroom for myself and my daughter. I've only ever been able to afford to rent one bedroom at a time. So even though she's a 7th grader, we have to share a pretty small space. But I do that because I'm also a transit user and I don't have a car. So I need to live in a walkable community where I have access to all the things that I need. And I'm also a hotel worker downtown. So, you know, my income is limited. I don't know everything about what Code Refresh is doing. And I'm not sure exactly what you'll be discussing today specifically. So I just thought I'd list a few of my values as a Richmonder and as a member of the community. So what I really value and what I want to see come out of this initiative, for one, it's high density affordable housing. Bring on all the affordable housing, all the high density mixed use walkable neighborhoods. Those are really important to me. I know that we want to do things gradually so people don't freak out. But if we could, you know, recognize the urgency of the housing crisis in Richmond, that would be great. And then access to public transit, of course, is really important to me. So I'd like to see these high density housing place where residents have access to public transit. And so we can try to start moving away from the car dependence that we see in the city that keeps people's opportunities really limited. Also, really importantly, I want to see this initiative disrupt the displacement of Black residents and gentrification in our communities. I think that's not what we want to stand for as Richmonders, and that should be a really priority for everyone. So racial and income diversity is what I want to see in my Richmond. I don't want to see Black residents be pushed out of their communities. And I also just in general want the growth that we see and shape over the next, many decades to be sustainable, and equitable. And I also appreciate the need for environmental justice, green spaces, and accessibility. I don't know if this is something that Code Refresh addresses, but we don't have a very accessible city as far as people with physical mobility limitations. It would be great if we could make it easier to make buildings and new developments required to be accessible for everyone. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia.
We have 2 minutes left before we're going to move on to the virtual participation. So just, yes.
I'm taking the last 2 minutes. Thank you for this opportunity. I really enjoyed hearing the previous statements too. My name is Lisa Porter. I live in District 4, Stratford Hills. And we found out about this initiative through a VAL pack that arrived in May. No contact from the city whatsoever. No contact from city planning, from the zoning board. So we are trying to rush our opinion in here. We live in a large neighborhood, an old growth neighborhood, water and air and soil resources. And the R2 portion, like the previous gal, I don't know everything about Code Refresh, but the R2 properties like we live on can be subdivided, built high. I moved in a year and a half ago. We do not have the water infrastructure and the electricity dependability with what's there now. So just kind of representing that we think this is a very bad idea. And we welcome the opportunity to continue showing up and discussing this. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sam Pollard. I'm a resident in Richmond and work in Micro. I'm here today. I know I have very limited time, so I'm just going to say access in Richmond is very important. Access to jobs, access to schools, access to healthcare. That all depends on density and how close people are together. Our current zoning code makes it illegal for that to happen. So for Richmonders to be able to have access to the grocery store and such, one of the first steps is allowing for us to be closer together and have those mixed uses. I grew up in a really rural area in Virginia, and getting places was very difficult growing up. And so being able to live in Richmond now is really important because I can just walk to the grocery store. But for most people in the city, they don't have that opportunity because for much of the city, we've restricted it to be single family. So folks can't access the grocery store without a car and such. And so thank you for your time.
Like the woman who came before me, we're
Can you
all
just give us your
coming in
name?
late. Excuse me?
Your name, please,
I'm
for the record.
Stella. I live in a Great Fulton.
Thank you.
We're all coming in new on this. It's difficult to understand some of the zoning laws and we're all coming up to speed slowly. When I saw the second version of this, I almost felt insulted because I felt like there were so many inconsistencies in it. So many, for instance, they talk about signage, but there's no discussion of, it would eliminate all the graffiti art that's all over Richmond if we follow the signage rules. They have a list of regulations that just are numbers. None of us would know what that is. That tells me that the consultant didn't have time to do his work and just put in a list of things. That's not right. And there's so many inconsistencies, not only within the document, between the document and the 300 plan, and also with what we were briefed on, where we were told there'd be 20% trees or 17% trees. And then when you see the diagrams, there's no way a tree could even fit here. There's no concern for parking. There's no concern for anything. I just saw that the plan, that the City Council and Planning Commission approved a 12-story building to replace the apartments in Creighton. What are we doing? Are we pouring all our poor people into a slum like Robert Moses did, or that like the old Cabrini projects, or in, coming from New York? We've seen the disaster that this can be. We need housing, not the ACE apartments that are renting 2-bedroom apartments at $4,500. Who can a month? Who can afford that? We need to figure out, how do we get affordable housing? How do we do stores and not vape shops? We don't need vape shops. We need libraries. We need grocery stores. We don't need more these kinds of things. And this does not address it. It is really not ready for prime time. It's insulting that you gave this out to the people of Richmond to look at. And the idea on this list that the few things, I've been reading all the letters that have been written about this, and none of this complaints are being covered. Even the list that most of the people had negative comments about code refresh, I don't see anything being covered in what's going to be briefed today. We need to solve our problem with housing. We definitely need to. We need affordable rentals. We need affordable housing. This doesn't do it. And if we just let it fly, we're going to regret this immensely. And another lady spoke about trees. I want to say something. Dominion and one of Verizon cut down old trees in our community. We tried to fight it and everything. That was supposed to plant new trees. It takes hundreds of years to grow these trees and nothing's happened. The city is totally unresponsible to us. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We'll use the last 15 minutes for public comment online. Marianne, could you unmute the first speaker? And you could announce your name, please, for the record.
Hello, folks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Good afternoon, members of ZAC. My name is Kevin Sanfarini. I'm a resident of the Fulton neighborhood in the 7th City Council District, and today I'm speaking on behalf of my climate advocacy organization, Climate Changemakers RVA. We advocate for climate policy on the local, regional, and statewide level. Today, I'd like to touch on one of the issues spoken about at City Council's meeting the other night, and that's duplexes. In order for Richmond to do our part to address climate pollution, we need more people living within walking, biking, and bus distance of where they want to go. We do that by allowing more density in the city, and particularly by allowing gradual and incremental density in our established residential neighborhoods. This means allowing duplexes universally across the entire city. In the interest of brevity, I'm going to conclude my comments there, so thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Will Wilson to be able to unmute this.
Will Wilson?
Yeah, thank you. Will Wilson, RVA YIMBY, resident, 2nd District, lead at RVA YIMBY, member, Historic Jackson Ward Association. Be brief, comments related to tree canopy standards. Because of the conversation a couple of sessions ago, been poking around different zoning codes across the country that had implemented similar standards. I want to share 4 provisions contained within Portland, Oregon's tree canopy standards, which I haven't heard discussed, that I'd like the group to consider, maybe adopting into our standards as they become formal. One is related to tree density credits. I know we've had some discussion around right away. Do trees that are planted in the the public strip next to the private property between the street count towards the credit? Portland does not allow this mostly. I think that's the direction we're heading. They do allow this for smaller sites, however, under 3,000 square feet. So looking at those smaller sites, it might be hard to fit different trees within a smaller site. It might be a little more complicated. They do allow that credit for small building sites, small parcels under 3,000 square feet. Not saying that I'm recommending that number, but it is something to consider on the smaller end. Let's make it easier for that small infill development and not impede with canopy standards. So exemption or credit on the smaller parcel site. On the opposite side of I want to pull out something else that Portland does, which is they allow, instead of just looking at the entire site or the parcel, if a site is over, let's see if it's right here. If a site's over an acre, they do allow a definition of a development impact area. So the percentage is only related to the development impact area, not the entire site. So this might be larger sites, maybe larger suburban sites, a couple acres. Maybe we're not developing the entire site. There might be some other passive uses contained in the site plan. This would allow those tree canopy percentages to only be required within a defined development impact area. So that's kind of on the larger parcel side. One more thing I want to pull out from the code is the payment in lieu of planning. I know we've covered this a little bit in the presentation. Sustainability Office, they make this really simple in Portland. I think I've heard some language around you have to prove the hardship, or you have to kind of justify why you would pay into a fund instead of providing it on site. canopy on site. They make this really simple. You don't have to justify it. You don't have to explain it. They simply have a definition that you would pay into the fund the equivalent to the cost of planting and establishing one 1.5-inch caliper tree. The fee per tree will be credited at a rate of one medium. That's their entire provision for paying into the thing. It's an easier option. Let's not burden our developers, especially our small developers, with justification for what they want to do with trees. This is a real option. The last thing, simply, they have an option B for developers, and I think this could be useful along our transit lines. They allow a developer to completely set aside this option of providing percentage-based, whether it's impact area or the entire site. You can simply say they have a provision, kind of an off-ramp, which is an option B, which says you have to provide coverage on the site area minus the building coverage of existing proposed development. If you want to maximize that site potential, I'm thinking along our transit lines, built areas, we want to target nodes like Scott's Addition, Manchester. If you want to maximize that site, we won't burden you with percentages. Simply, whatever you don't use, you have to provide canopy coverage on that. Don't worry about, this is a way to where maybe it won't malform a site plan, which is otherwise trying to accomplish what we want to do, which is maximize housing production on our larger parcels. So I'm going to send over some links over to you, Marianne, 4 great things. And this is recently passed, Portland, Oregon, forward-thinking city that cares a lot about the environment. They're also leading one of the leading urban areas in the country for allowing
Could you go ahead and
starter
wrap
homes.
up your comments, please?
Yep. I'm going to
Thank
send
you.
link. Thank you so much. Bye.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
We have Patricia Merrill.
Tricia Merrill.
Hi,
Good afternoon.
hi. This is Patty Merrill, and I'm a resident of the First District. Page 210 of Richmond 300 anticipates that rewriting the zoning code is a 3 to 5 year process. The engagement survey prepared by Brick and Story indicates that public engagement began in April 24, with the ZAC starting to meet in June 24. The summary further indicates that in phase 5 especially, and I'm quoting here, concerns about transparency, accountability, and the real-world impacts of zoning changes became more pronounced. From the public's perspective, we are only 2 years into what was always anticipated to be a long process, and their worries about transparency and accountability are increasing, not decreasing. If I were in the city's shoes, I would release draft 3 when it is ready, seek new ways to educate the public on the rationale for code refresh and the contents of draft 3, continue to take comments on draft 3, and plan that draft 4 is what will go to the Planning Commission and City Council. Remember, draft 3 will be the first time that citizens see the map and all parts of the zoning ordinance, which will exceed 300 pages, together and have an opportunity to comment. By Richmond 300's own anticipated timetable, we are at halftime or early third quarter of a zoning rewrite. Let's do the work to reduce the concerns about transparency and accountability and look for ways to compromise so that we can have a zoning code that moves us forward together rather than tears us apart. Thank you.
Thank you.
Emily Grimes.
Hi, I would like to ditto what Patty said, and I have a couple of other
Could you just state
points.
your name for the record, please?
Oh, I'm sorry, Emily Grimes.
Thank you.
I ditto Patty, and I would also like to start by saying I'm in support of affordable housing. I'm in support of walkable neighborhoods. I'm in support of mixed-use neighborhoods, and I'm in support of all of these when, where, and how it makes sense for all Richmond residents. Richmond's not only a beautiful city, but it's a city that offers many types of housing and neighborhoods to suit the many ways of living in this area. My big 2 concerns with the current code refresh is a disregard for neighborhood character and infrastructure capacity. Code refresh attempts to create a blanket of zoning, quote, by right, without proper guidelines, nor future resident input to honor and protect the existing and the valuable character and personalities of Richmond's many neighborhoods and housing types. I say valuable because these neighborhood personalities support quality of life and tax revenues from visitors and residents alike. I have two specific examples in areas of concern. I am a resident of the Museum District. Elwood Avenue, the current draft 2 shows that 4-story multi-unit housing on Elwood Avenue is in the Museum District. It's a complete departure from the character and personality of that existing neighborhood, which has existed for over a century. Because these are not single family units, they are not protected by the guidelines of the 1996 design overlay. Carytown's another example of a fabulously Richmond experience. Many visitors and residents enjoy spending time strolling the streets in this area and spending money to generate tax dollars. Allowing 3-story multi-unit buildings on Cary Street without the design overlay guidelines would not honor this very special place in the city of Richmond. It's the unique nature of each of these non-franchise, locally owned storefronts that make this area so unique to visit. There are no design overlay guidelines for this area of which I'm aware. The infrastructure is my second concern. Public transportation. It's limited and infrequent bus routes, which mostly only run east and west. Getting in and out of this area with public transportation is limited and inconvenient at the best, and in reality, really not manageable for most traffic to the area. There's limited parking in this area. I'm a resident of Floyd Avenue, and just about every Saturday, I'm not able to park anywhere near my house. Increasing density in this area would stress this issue even more. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more comment?
Hello. Oh, whoops. Hello. 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 Hello.
Did you unmute? Bruce? Bruce, if you want to unmute yourself and state your name and offer your comments.
And there we go. Hi, I'm Bruce Pardo. I am Emily Grimes' partner. So I'm here to make comments. I'm also with her in the Museum District. I support everything that she just said. I think that one other thing is that, you know, this idea of by right development, it's just, I think it's kind of an older form of trying to apply a cookie cutter. I think what would be a much more deft solution for Richmond that would maintain its quality and character and its tax base is a contextual zoning. I think there's a lot of examples of that. I have a piece of property in New Hampshire that you know, we're doing the exact thing with our local zoning department right now, is looking at contextualized based rules where you're not going to end up with these kind of Franken properties that really are sore thumbs in their neighborhoods. So that's my major, you know, you've got Richmond is an extraordinary location. You know, just the mix of everything that it has is basically unique on the East Coast. There is not another town or city with the vibrancy of Richmond that you're going to find anywhere. It is a jewel. And so I think it needs to be considered in that way and not with a cookie cutter and frankly fairly ham-fisted approach. It's a little bit outdated. I don't mean to be offensive, but I'm a little bit surprised that there are these by right aspects that are included. And I very much agree with all of the examples that Emily just said. And, you know, I'm missing my ability to park on Saturdays already. So the idea that if we add density and the public transportation will follow, I just think is very backwards. It's not protecting your citizenry. The infrastructure needs to come first, and then you build on top of that. You're looking at areas where there are mature, developed out neighborhoods. We want to maintain the character of those neighborhoods. That's the beauty of Richmond. Again, I very much for affordable, high density housing for, seniors, workforce, entry level. There are plenty of places in Richmond that are appropriate for that, that have a lot more access to public transportation. So I guess the final note that I'll make is don't put public transportation second. Don't add the density before you get that, or you're just going to end up with a mess on your hands that's going to lower the value of Richmond and the tax base. Thank you.
Thank you. We've reached the end of our public comment period. If you were not able to offer comments, you can submit them by email to richmond300@rva.gov. So with that, I'm going to return to the beginning of the agenda. Now that we have a quorum in the room, we need to address the request for virtual participation. So Benny Gates, are you online? Benny?
Benny is there.
He's
Benny,
there?
you should be able to unmute yourself.
Benny, if you could just unmute yourself
Okay.
and state why you're requesting to participate virtually and where you're participating from.
Benny Gates, I'm participating from, I'm in Richmond, but I can't come to the meeting because I had a prior commitment because you guys changed the meeting date to today.
Yeah,
And then I have a boot
understand.
on, so I can't be in two places at one time with the boot. I can't drive.
I understand. Thank you, Benny. Could we get a motion to approve Mr. Gates' request to participate virtually? Second?
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, Maritza Beechin. You could just state why you're participating virtually and where you're calling in from?
Hi, I'm participating virtually to manage childcare with my husband out of town, and I'm participating from Richmond, Virginia.
Great. Can I get a motion for Maritza to participate virtually?
So moved.
We have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, Melissa Sabanko?
Yeah, I am out of town on a long scheduled vacation. I am in Durban, West Virginia.
Okay, well, thank you for giving up time on your vacation to participate. We appreciate that. Can we get a motion for Ms. Sabanko?
Ms. Blue.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us virtually. So the next item on the agenda is a council recap and meeting introduction. We'll turn it over to Mary Ann Bitts.
Good afternoon, everyone. Marian Pitts with the Planning Department. At our last meeting, we had Kyle from RKG join us virtually to go over the second of two development scenario analyses. This analysis was on the mixed-use districts, the residential attached districts, and the residential multifamily districts, which he shared with you and reviewed with you. If you have any additional questions, please let us know. We can work further back to Kyle and provide additional data on those analysis. We also had an opportunity for open discussion with the council, and I had a good discussion on what affordability, starter homes, and the residential cottage districts with the council at the time. Today, Director Wong will be doing a presentation, his third night in the row, sharing some information about Code Refresh. A lot of this information you all may know because you've been working with us for the past few years. About Code Refresh process, but and asking some questions about as we work towards this third draft. Last night, we had the same presentation with Planning Commission, asking them the same 3 questions, and the night before having that same conversation with council. If you can share some information about kind of the input that was shared if you're interested in those conversations as well. I know Elizabeth will go over the procedures, but we're hoping to have some comments in a orderly fashion as we discuss those amongst the meetings this afternoon.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mary Ann? Thank you. So before we turn it over to Director Bonk, as Mary Ann said, Director Bonk's going to provide a presentation on some feedback from draft 2 and 3 that have, I think, garnered the most attention, comments from the public, from the ZAC, and from everyone involved. And I know Kevin's looking for some feedback on those 3 items from this group, but those specific items to help him and his staff and the consultants work on shaping draft 3. So keep that in mind, that we're not going to stop conversation if you don't comment on those 3 items, but I think it would really help the director to get some feedback and direction on these 3 specific items. Once Director Vaughn finishes his presentation, we will give each member 5 minutes to comment, question, and then if there's any time left, we'll have kind of a collaborative discussion, but we want to give everyone the chance. I'm kind of following the model that Council and Planning Commission did by allowing the 5-minute discussion, and I think that gives everyone a chance to speak. So with that, Director Vaughn, turn it over to you. You should have this presentation memorized by now. I know I almost.
Getting close.
Yeah.
And
you?
Thank you, Kevin Giovanni, Director. Before I begin, and maybe this will come up in the presentation, but just I'm going to do my best, Tony Reale here, to fact check. Just for this body, Mosby South Community Unit Plan, Council approved that at their last meeting. No more than 500 units, no building taller than 5 stories there. Notification to residents, we'll talk a little bit about today. We've done a ton of engagement work. And have continued to do that. The mayor also sent out a postcard to every single parcel in December of last year, notifying about this activity. Tree canopy, yes, just want to put out there that our current code has 0 protection for trees. You can go in and plow down a lot by right, and there's nothing we can do about it. Code of Virginia allows municipalities to establish minimums. If you're going to do that, it's very, I'll say, restrictive in terms of like what you can and cannot do. So we'll have to follow that, but our intent is in Code Refresh to look at doing those minimums. And then vape shops, Council last year made it extremely difficult to do vape shops in the city by defining retail tobacco, and those will be coming over in the current ordinance. So just want to make sure those points are clear before I jump into what I am doing today. And with that, I think the teams will allow me to share. I've got privileges, and I will go through, probably do this a little more quickly than I've done the last 2 times, because I am sitting with a lot of people who know a lot about this. So I'll try and focus on the things that are important. So again, purpose and objectives, I think Chair Greenfield set it up. What we're here to do is to get some real feedback on this. I prefaced the conversation with City Council and with Planning Commission. There are no right answers. There are no wrong answers. We are trying to get to unanswer, enable us to put something forward in draft 3. And so I just want to put that out there and framing that discussion today. Again, I think just when we talk about framing, just a quick framing, because I do want to remind us all, right? This is an implementation of Richmond 300. Our current code does not align with our master plan, especially when it comes to housing choice, neighborhood walkability, economic vitality, and climate resilience. And so we need a new zoning code that allows more residents to build housing units that fit their needs, allows for greater mixing of uses at the proper scale and in the proper places, facilitating new development that complements our most significant cultural, historic, and natural assets. And we need to make it easier to understand. I agree, right? Like the code is very thick. And I think you will find in the current code as we've gone through, right, a lot more graphics, a lot more tables. It's still long, but trying to make it more easy for anyone to understand. And so thinking about aligning, are you able to X that out on the top? Sorry. How do we align with Richmond 300? It specifically talks in pages 210 to 211 when it talks about the big moves, and move number 1 is rewrite the zoning ordinance. And it talks about a zoning code has to fulfill these things that Richmond 300 talked about. It said this code needs to work on promoting, expanding equity. It needs to promote and expand sustainability and promote and expand beauty. And so these are the 3 things. And again, sometimes they can be at conflict with each other. Our goal is to make a code that instead of an either or, it's an and. And this is why we're having these discussions, because there's tensions involved in that discussion. And so again, very important that Richmond 300 frames how we get down to a new zoning ordinance. And 2 years ago, Planning Commission, who per our charter is in charge of the master plan and in charge of putting together an ordinance of zoning to implement that, tasked our department with coming up with a new code. And part of that process involved establishing this committee to do some feedback. And so again, right, we take Richmond 300 and how do we filter it into a new code? Well, we take a lot of input along the way, and very important, I think, it's Code of Virginia. Like, we have to remember, we're a Dillon rule state. And so there's many things that we'd love to do, but we cannot because we have not been authorized for. So those are hard lines that we cannot change. Now, with that, General Assembly this last session changed some of those rules. So those are things that we can consider moving forward. But we have to make sure we're operating in those lines. You know, looking at, again, part early on, probably, again, seems ages ago for us, but like Utilon talking about their pattern book and their neighborhood analysis, we are not starting from a farm field. We are not starting from a blank slate. We have a built environment. And one of the goals has been to try and legalize what we actually have here on the ground. And so going through and understanding, right, where that's at, and then looking to the future, RKG has looked at scenarios of, all right, if we do these things in code, what might happen when it comes to development? What might happen when it comes to demolition? What might happen when it comes to new housing units? And then we have, right, bodies that have been working on it. This body in particular, many of you participated in working groups. We've had public comment here. And so this has been really robust in terms of getting into specific details, right, about implementation, because it is wonky. We've also worked, you know, with our colleagues in other city departments, looking at other cities, what they're doing, holding in the public, small group roundtables to get discussions, meeting with different stakeholders, and then, right, the big stuff, meeting with civic associations, going to council meetings. We have been to every single council district meeting to discuss with their constituents what's happening, the big public open houses, community pop-ups, and then just a whole suite of online tools that we've taken, again, all funneling in to what we've been producing. And substantial agreement. And I want to just, again, make clear, because I think some people have said like, well, I don't know if I agree on this. This is not perfect alignment. What I'm saying is generally we have gotten to a place where there are, I'll say, less ends of the spectrum in terms of opinions on some of these things. And we've gotten to a place where I think we've been able to move forward with some substantial agreement about what it should be. And so in terms of like the number of zoning districts we have, the right amount that are there, yeah, we're still having some conversations about how we map them, but I think we've reached at the right number of them, including an open space district, which we've never had before, to really, you know, go forward and proactively preserve our open space. Looking at, again, uses, the ability to have more nuanced uses. So, right, it's not just like a retail use, it's a retail use at a certain scale in a certain district, and maybe it's bigger in other districts. And so how we look at those, a focus on, you know, nodes and corridors that Richmond 300 said, that's where we want our intensity and density along there. And so looking at how we map those and put those together. In terms of a form-based approach, I think there's been great support for, again, focusing on the form to focus on how things look, right? Even if we're moving to by right uses, this code is much more prescriptive and in terms of like, right, what are things going to look like moving forward? And in terms of like contextualization, especially when it comes to like contextual heights, all the way up through the RM districts. And so just because you can go 3 stories or 4 stories on the ground, you actually may not be able to because you have a 1 or 2-story building next to you. And so those are things that I think in terms of the incrementalism, that's built into this code, which we don't have right now. And then things that I think public benefits when we talk about pedestrian widths and an outdoor amenity space, and again, tree canopy, I think, again, substantial agreement towards moving forward on these things. Where we come back to and keep having discussions about our 3 major things. And these are the focus of like getting some clarity from different bodies on where do we go? How many people in a household? How do we zone places of worship? And how many dwelling units on a lot? How many people in a household? So I'm going to go through each of these questions, kind of some framing from Richmond 300. All right, different statements that talk about, you know, living situations or housing, or how it relates to these, and then go through like where we've been and where we're maybe suggesting as an idea, move forward and seeking feedback on. So when we talk about, you know, how many people in a household, we need to think about things about ensuring that homelessness is rare, brief, and one time. As we've discussed this, one of the stakeholders has been, right, our housing community and the continuum of care. And being able to have congregate living situations is vitally important for somebody to be able to get back onto their feet to have stable housing. And so that involves, right, multiple people who aren't related living together for a period of time. It talks about, you know, how do we look at areas that are potentially gentrifying and how to prevent displacement, and also aging in place. Again, are there other options where it's really expensive to live alone? Can I have roommates to lower that burden on me financially? And so how many people in a household? Current code, we said not more, or right now we say not more than 3 unrelated persons or combination of related and unrelated persons. Draft 1, we didn't define it. Draft 2, we went back and said 8 or fewer unrelated individuals, and that was based on definitions of quote unquote family that Code of Virginia has for certain living situations for people with disabilities or rehab situations. And so we said, all right, Code of Virginia thinks that's a number that's pertinent to health, safety, and welfare, then we'll go with 8. We've moved in draft 3. One of the things we're proposing is zoning is not the place for regulating occupancy. And that is to fall back on the building code, which is, I'll say, probably a higher standard for health and safety, letting the building code set occupancy standards. And so in the building code, there's occupancy standards, and it's based on how many bedrooms you have and how big those bedrooms are. How do we zone places of worship? All right, aligning with Richmond 300. Again, this is right out of the gate, you know, rezoning in accordance with the future land use plan. So like looking at, right, what are the future land use categories and how do we get there? Reduce the demolition of historical buildings. There's actually a section in Richmond 300. There's a little call-out box that talks about, hey, places of worship in terms of like the buildings that they have. There's some pretty awesome buildings in the city. And how could we work on reducing their risk of getting demolished? How could they, if a congregation moves on, be potentially readapted or repurposed? And then looking at one of the things, again, of opportunities for, you know, entrepreneurship and creating jobs, and in places where maybe there's not access to that. And so looking at these places that have large land and buildings that may not be used all through the week, are these areas, again, for small scale economic development. So places of worship today, all over the place, from R1, which is right our least intense district, to B4, which is most of downtown. It's related to what's around there. Draft 1, we said institutional, which is how we've zoned major institutions. So, you know, the government complexes, VCU, schools, so VCU, University of Richmond, libraries. We put places of worship in with that. Draft 2, we pivoted to mixed use MX3, which would, again, hearing some things about, all right, still allowing places of worship to continue, the assembly use to continue. But are there other opportunities for these firms to build housing and maybe do some small scale commercial? But I think, you know, there are probably some loopholes in that, and the intent is not to like have strip malls in the middle of neighborhoods. And so the shift is to look at a more nuanced approach using some of the RM categories and RC. And so in neighborhoods to look at RMA, which would allow up to, again, still allows detached homes, attached homes, but small buildings up to 6 units. Major streets and corridors, RMB, which would allow up to 12 units. Transit corridors and growth nodes, RMC, which would be, you know, unlimited units, 4 stories, but right in the areas that we said we wanted some more intensity and density. And then RC, the residential cottage, you know, we put as requested. I know we've had some robust discussion here. RC, right, is fundamentally different in terms of how a property looks and operates. I think it's a great option in terms of, especially with a cap of 1,200 square feet per unit, of being able to provide small scale housing that fits in the neighborhood. But because it is so different, I think we're not proactively prescribing it. We're maybe looking for it to come as requested. But if the bodies that be want to do some more prescribing, I think part of the conversation we're having. All right, and last one, how many dwelling units on a lot? So, Richmond 300, we need to create and preserve high quality, distinctive, well-designed neighborhoods and nodes throughout the city. Like, I very much agree with like again, I think there's some substantial agreement on like, yeah, we want to, keep our awesome neighborhoods beautiful and really thriving. And so how do we do that? And again, looking at citywide awareness of integrating housing at all income levels into every residential neighborhood so that every household has housing choice throughout the city. Right? So different households at different incomes. Again, it's not going to be every place in every part of the city, but a lot more choices than currently exist today. And then objective 14.5, encourage more housing types throughout the city and greater density along transit corridors and nodes and priority neighborhoods. Again, probably sound like a broken record, but keep going back to the emphasis on nodes and corridors. And I think, if we go into the RKG analysis again, it shows like delivery of housing units along nodes and corridors, which is like what we want. And so thinking about that at the same time about housing types throughout the city. And that's why we talk about this question. So how many dwelling units on a lot? So today you get a dwelling unit, plus you can do an accessory dwelling unit that's up to 1/3 of the floor area or 500 square feet, whichever is greater. Draft 1, this was the 2+1. We said you could have 2 principal dwelling units and then an ADU of 1,000 square feet. Concerns about this fueling demolitions and displacement. And so we instituted called the preservation bonus and saying, hey, you can have those 2 principal dwelling units plus the ADU, but only if you keep the existing building that's there. And it could be up to 3 structures, right? Dwelling unit, ADU, or dwelling unit, ADU. Those were all options that are on the table. Or if you took the structure down, you only get what you get today. And that's a dwelling unit plus an ADU. Draft 3 shift is based on, I'll say, some concerns we've heard about like the overcrowding of structures and overcovering of lots. It's the same approach in terms of 3 units when you preserve the existing building, but only 2 buildings. So the existing building that you have, it could be 1 or 2 units. And then if you add a second building, it could be an accessory dwelling unit of around 1,200 square feet. Again, if you take that building down, you get what you get today, and that's a dwelling unit plus an ADU. Depending on where you're at, that 1,200 square feet could be larger or smaller than what you're allowed based on your normal or your principal dwelling unit. I think we're moving towards trying to establish, instead of a percentage or a ratio, looking to find a square footage number. And so just putting this into, all right, here's what you can do today. So these are lots. Again, I will say this is not meant to be exhaustive of what you can do. This is illustrative of like, here's some options. So the blue is existing buildings. The light blue is like, I carved it out of my existing building. The red is new construction. P is my principal unit, A is my accessory dwelling unit. So lots of different options. Draft 3 adds these options. And really what it does is, hey, I take my existing building and I'm able to split it, not just for an ADU, but I could split it in half to a duplex, upper, lower, front, back, side by side, and then add the ADU. And then again, with the preservation bonus still there, only if a lot is vacant for 5 years can you go in and add a duplex by right or the 3rd unit with the ADU. And I think one of the things also is making sure we have, again, about this conversation about context, is making sure that the accessory dwelling unit is accessory. So it's de minimis of the primary dwelling. That has not been in previous drafts, and that will be something I think we will look at in draft 3 so that it truly is accessory in terms of height limits and shorter than the principal unit on the block. So next steps, as mentioned, this is 3rd night of the concert series. And so we are here to have some discussion. We can discuss about anything. It would be helpful if we could get some direct feedback on these 3 questions in particular. And if we don't get to it today, to give us something over, the next few weeks, so that we can incorporate that and hopefully into draft 3 that we'll release. And
Thank you.
thank you.
So now we'll turn it over to Zach for comment. Councilwoman Robertson close us out. So Charlie, would you like to kick us off?
Okay.
So you have lots of notes. Lots of notes.
I think the goal at this point where you are ought to be to get that code, get that draft 3 done because of the timing issues that have been discussed earlier. and focus on what really works. Things works. A lot of, we've heard that certain things in terms of affordable housing are not likely to be. So, and focus on what in the affordable housing field really is going to make a difference. What will not make a difference in the affordable housing field, from everything I've seen, is putting other housing units on single-family detached lots. And I just think that's a non-starter for the vast majority of people that live in neighborhoods with one single-family detached home on each lot. It's just a non-starter. They moved there and bought their home precisely because it was a single-family neighborhood. And they had the reasonable expectation that their neighborhood would remain that way. And I realize that technically the city can rezone anything anytime it wants to, but it hasn't been doing that except in code refresh. So let's focus on where in the city we can really make a difference in terms of generating affordable housing or additional housing units, but don't do it in established neighborhoods that have their own character and have their own contribution to making the city of Richmond what it is. Oh, go ahead. All right.
You can watch it, take it away.
The other thing is that draft 3 is going to be important because there's certain things that haven't been included before. Definitions, the administrative part of it. For example, if they're going to be, and I hope they're not, if they're going to be non-residential uses permitted by conditional use permit, what are the terms of the conditional use permit? Is that going to be the way it works now, or is it going to be something different? So there are a lot of things that we need to see in that as well. And finally, because I don't have a lot of time here. Somebody needs to crunch the latest draft 3, carefully because it is written in consultant speak. It just is. It is not something that is not the way you write legislation in this state or I think in any other state. Most of it is incomplete sentences. It's zoning by picture and chart. Nothing wrong with pictures and charts as to clarify things, but the basic language as to what is permitted, not permitted, and so forth should be in clear and precise, complete sentences, the way we expect all legislation to be. It's not that way now, and that needs to happen to this before I think it can be approved, as well as things in there which obviously are from a consultant that doesn't know what we do in Virginia. The Register of Deeds is mentioned in draft 2. We don't have a Register of Deeds in the city of Richmond. We don't have a Register of Deeds in any county or city in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Can we get it correct so that it applies to the city of Richmond the way it should? So there's a lot of just review that needs to happen of this ordinance to make it read correctly, be precise, understandable, and not just consultant speak the way it is now.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the comments, and I think, two things. One, as far as conditional use permits go, the intent is to bring over, again, for those that have conditional uses now, that similar language, and I think, right, you can set up some basic provisions of like, right out of the gate, if you're gonna do a conditional use for certain uses, right? It's already like these 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 criteria, right, that you have to meet before you even ask for anything else. Or I'll say before council can do that. And so I think the retail tobacco is a good one that has not been fully illustrated, and that is making sure that, right, there's certain provisions in there that keep that moving forward. I think, if we can, and what I've talked about before, right, rolling out in stages, if we're able to get to a point of having the definitions ready to go, I think that is important, right, in terms of like how you interpret some of those things. So if we can get that sooner than later, definitely be willing to put that out to, this body, but also, the public for.
Did you have any opinions on the number of unrelated persons? I know as today, it's 3. There's a proposal to go to building code. There was some talk of some members of council, maybe, doubling, going somewhere in between and maybe doubling 3 between 3 and 8, maybe going to 6? Is there any preference on that, or the churches, or?
Well, on the number of persons constituting a household, if you look at draft 2, it has no limit. There is no limit. Now, you can infer from the number of individuals that constitute a group home, which is 9 or more, that, well, that must mean that you can have no more than 8 in housing units. But it doesn't say that. Another example of how the language is just needs some major work. But I don't, I'm not too terribly concerned about related versus unrelated. You could have a family that's more than 8. You know, you have blended families a lot. They each bring 3 or 4 kids and so forth. So if they're related, they're related. If they're not related, 8's a good enough number for me.
Thank you. Riley?
Yeah, can you clarify, so you were mentioning at one point you said something about percentage or square feet when talking about ADUs. I didn't quite catch, like, is there one way you're leaning on that, and how does that work with the overall lot coverage percentage?
Sure. So I think, and again, staff's recommendation would maybe be to go towards a hard number in terms of just from an administration standpoint, or an expectation of, like, from a neighbor of like, okay, what could go up next door to me, like so big or so large. Let me put 2 pieces into that. I think, one, for an ADU, a number, the 1,200 square feet came back in some discussion with like housing advocates in terms of like, that's a housing unit that could still house a family. Some say it needs to be a little bit larger. Some say it could be smaller and still provide that. But in terms of where that falls, as it's written right now, right? Some people would be limited to 500 square feet. Once you start to get above a 3,600 square foot house, you can have a bigger ADU. And so that's, again, looking for some feedback on that. I think though a hard number might be easier to digest. Part of that also could be, right now, the way it's defined is we're just counting the square footage of the ADU. It is not counting square footage if you put that on top of a garage. And so some have said, wow, that could be a really large structure, right? Like in terms of like, if you're building on top of a garage, you're only measuring that. So there's been some who have said, well, make it 1,200 square feet for your accessory building. You put a garage, you put a tool shed, you put a ADU, like whatever, like the structure is the structure. So we know kind of, again, from size with that. I think we will look also when it comes to lot coverage of potentially tweaking, because one of the concerns has been, hey, you're just going to, you're not answering the questions about, tear down and then I'll say McMansion in its place, right? That fills the whole lot. So I think we may look at for lot coverages in the RA, pulling it down slightly if there's only one unit, and keeping it where it is if there's multiple dwelling units. And I think we're just going back through the pattern book again, but in terms of like the coverages in draft 1 were very high. After further analysis, we realized like we don't need that much. Like there's plenty of room for people to add on and build without filling up the whole lot. And so that may be also a tweak that's part of this.
Thanks. Okay, another question. So for what you were showing for a draft 3 approach to the places of worship, I'm a little confused then. How do places of worship continue to operate? Like, would they all be placed into an RM or RC, like after they potentially change? I'm a little confused. It actually made sense to me when they were mixed use because they have a mix of uses. So it's a little confusing to me now, even though I think I get the intent of maybe not trying to introduce a strip mall into a neighborhood. That makes perfect sense. But also I didn't quite understand when you said the residential cottage by request. What is that request process? Like us right now being like, hey, this would be a good place for it, or like later on?
Sure. I probably should, right? Like tap out for me talking, because that shouldn't kind of get this time. I just want to make sure we're keeping on track. So the code should read that a place of worship or an assembly use in those RM districts will be, continue to be an allowed and permissible use. So I just making that clear, like, the intent is still to allow that activity to happen, because we allow that activity to happen right now, like I say, across the board, right? Even in R1 right now, we allow very large assembly uses. And so in the RMs and RC, we would allow that to continue. So you could continue doing that. And in there, right, there's certain accessory uses that they could continue to do. Generally, again, that they're accessory to the assembly use. And so that would still be allowed. As far as RC, you know, as requested, I think because it's the only district that moves away from like, right, building standards of like what they look like and allows, you know, for more buildings on a lot versus in an area, right, like the RDs where it's very specific about it. It can have a lot of different configurations. And I've said, you know, I think in some areas you could say like, well, RC is an upzoning, and in some areas RC might be a downzoning, and it's just it's contextual because it also depends like how large the lot is. And so by request, I think one parcel we may do is it's a city parcel where we have a affordable housing developer, Eden Village, looking at that, and it would fit that. It may be others. Again, if places of worship or other property owners were to come to us now, I think worth consideration. And maybe council or planning commission comes up with something where they would like to proactively zone some parcels, but I think it's one that we exercise a little more caution because it changes the physical form much more than some of the other zoning districts.
I have a little bit more time just for brief opinion part. Okay. First of all, thank you for answering questions. I personally am in favor of what I was seeing with some of these draft 3 teasers, I guess. As far as it goes towards unrelated people living together, when I lived in DC, the only way I could live there was by living with 7 other roommates. And I think it's a viable way that many people start their housing journey. And I don't think we should outlaw it. And I didn't realize until today that it wasn't legal for more than 3 people to live together. So that's kind of wild. I disagree a little bit with Charlie. I don't think that, Charles, that ADUs and duplexes should just be discounted. I agree that it's probably not the thing that makes a huge dent in affordability, but what it does do is it allows for more flexibility. And we've seen that that's part of 300 is allowing different types of houses. In my work at the University of Richmond, I'm a researcher. I look at a lot of old maps. And one of the things that you see is that speckled all throughout the neighborhoods that predate expressways and intense zoning code, there were a lot more multiple dwelling units. Even in some of the areas like where I live in Forest Hill, Woodland Heights, there were duplexes speckled throughout. It's something that existed. It's something that's a part of cities that sprung up before the 1950s. So I think it would be foolish to take that option off the table, and I'm in favor of it. And I feel like what draft 3 is pointing towards was a good way to do it. So I'd like to see more of that.
Okay. I'll give you comments on all 3, but sort of in reverse order. And first, with regard to this density issue and the dwelling units, you know, I've said since the first meeting that I was concerned about duplexes everywhere. I think the reality, though, is that we're going to have more density. We have an ADU statute. I think there are places, I mean, and I go back to the compromise that was in Richmond 300, and it's just very clear in the text that the primary use in residential areas is single-family dwellings. Secondary uses, which are along major streets, can insert duplexes and small multifamily buildings. I think that's the compromise that we ought to be focused upon. And there are other places. I reread major parts of Richmond 300 earlier today, where it talks about density in the corridors, in the nodes. It doesn't talk about inserting density everywhere. So I would encourage the department to look at that, focus on and that was not haphazard language. That came about as a result of a lot of citizen input. There was a time when there was going to be a residential 1 and a residential 2. They got rid of that and they came up with this primary use, secondary use. And I think that's the way out of this density and duplex issue. That said, thank you for including the preservation bonus in draft 3. I think that is positive. So that's complimentary feedback. I don't fully understand the 5-year bit, but I don't want to use all my time on that. Places of worship. I think this is trending in the right direction in terms of less impact on neighborhoods and more, again, I sound like broken record, on major streets and transit corridors. Anybody could quibble about these numbers, 6 units, 12 units, that kind of thing. Certainly in some residential, I think what happened in Northside 10 years ago with the seminary wanting to put apartments there, that caused a lot of angst, a lot of ugliness, and that I hope we can avoid. But directionally, if it's not so jarring to the surrounding neighborhood, then I think that's the way to go. Finally, the people in household, I've not really focused a lot on this. It does seem to me that referring to the building code, which talks about square footage of single versus multifamily bedrooms, is not providing an overall cap on the number of people in a unit. So that seems to be a step away from and toward the potential for this rooming house fear that I know some people have. Sometimes I think the most obvious thing is the best way. So going from 3 to 8, put it at 6 and move on is what I would do. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Do you have any other items you wanted to comment on? All right.
All right, thank you. With regard to the revised proposals for the places of worship, I have no issue with that whatsoever. I think it makes sense. The household sizes, I believe that something like a temporary shelter, say for homeless people, is not considered part of this math, correct?
So there would be different uses for years ago, we redefined to get in line with Code of Virginia. So there's emergency housing, which is like, I need somewhere to sleep tonight. Right. Transitional housing, which is intended to be, I'm coming out of emergency, but don't have something solid yet. And then permanent supportive housing for somebody who could not live on their own. Those 3 definitions or those uses will still be retained. And that's different in terms of, I'll say, what we're talking about, like a household.
But a homeless shelter is not going to have 50 feet per bed, right?
They will still have to have, in terms of depending on where the beds are placed, whether it's in separate rooms or in gymnasiums. So when we went through and worked on the emergency shelters, the building commissioner went through and said, all right, this is your capacity based on the use, based on ingress, egress, but that's set by building code.
Right. If it's building code, I don't know if there's anything we can do about it, but it seems like it would be good to allow.
So we do have in current code for emergency housing. There are limits for emergency housing in churches and places of worship. I believe it's up to 30 individuals, which again, a zoning max building code, you would still have to meet it through building code. So it could be less. So the zoning code has the ability to put caps on it, just like we do now. But for emergency housing, those are not in proposed code refresh.
And then with regard to the number of structures and a lot, I'm going to contradict myself here in a second, but I think a lot of the concerns about that are somewhat misplaced in that the economics of some of the neighborhoods that are most concerned about it is just not a realistic outcome. That being said, it does seem like it would be difficult to make a meaningful impact on the housing supply with with that change with allowing duplexes everywhere. I think ADU's fine, but it feels politically more expedient to just do away with that and move forward, and we can get something passed that allows us to make a difference in the areas where we can truly make a difference in the nodes and the corridors. That would be my statement there. And then big picture, mentioned a couple of these things in the meeting last night, but I'm concerned that the assessor will jump on the opportunity to crank up value of land that is now allowed to have increased density on it, even if there is a smaller scale building sitting on top of it that cannot possibly pay for that assessment. I think that's a concern. And then I have ongoing concerns about some of the design standards and the costs associated with those and the impact that will have on the ability to create more housing.
No, I think just for this group, because I mentioned it last night, in terms of some of the design standards, both in the district sections, but also chapter 4, we have been working to, I'll say, preserve the intent of good design, preserve the intent of pedestrian accessibility, preserve the intent of like keeping green space, with trying to simplify and focus on the most important points. And so I think you will see some things that maybe there were 10 ways to get there, but we only need like 1 or 2. And then I think, we've discussed it, I think extensively at this body in terms of, making sure there's good design without like over regulating it to make something that's just like impossible to do. And then we end up in a special use permit. So I think there will be some simplification of those into draft 3.
And, even making it more difficult to do though adds cost and expense and means that fewer new housing opportunities will exist. Just a reality. And I do think it's going to be critical to get clarity from the assessor on what he believes his role is when there is a new highest and best use for the land upon which a building either does or does not exist.
Okay. Tiffany Gunn. This is my second time around with you, Kevin. I was present for the presentation on Monday with City Council, and I could say a lot of questions and comments were right on. So I'm waiting for a few of those to be answered. So a lot of my concerns were there. I do agree with the church dwellings. I'm from the 9th district, and there are a lot of churches that are just sitting there unused that could be used for housing. So I do agree with that. They've been sitting since I was like probably a teenager. We're talking 30 years sitting there empty. So yes, I definitely agree with that. And I'm definitely probably not on the fence. I don't agree with the number with the single family housing, we allow 8 unrelated, because I do have a major concern with rooming houses and single family neighborhoods. I have a concern with that. But I'm not gonna go on. My number one concern for me, my passion is education. You keep bringing in the density of all the housing, more people when the schools are already overcrowded. So that is my concern. But I know it's not the number of houses, but that's my thing, the density of bringing in more and more people, more and more kids coming around, and the school's already crowded. My house is right in front of a trailer that I never knew was coming.
Please don't feel like you're limited to just those 3. I want to make sure that Kevin gets some adequate feedback on those 3, but certainly.
No problem. That's why I mentioned that I was at the meeting on Monday, because a lot was addressed on Monday. Great presentation, great question, and comment. So, yeah, so that's why I don't have to go. I'll just wait for the next one.
Yeah, I think for us too, and I think part of the discussion is, all right, as we come up with draft 3, like what are some of the other pieces of information, studies that, you need, or the bodies need, or the public needs to like understand, all right, what might be the potential impacts or what context we're talking about. I think schools is definitely one in terms of, right, I'll say part of the infrastructure question. our team has been working a lot more with schools. And I know that wasn't fully done with Richmond 300. But I think both us and schools are in a different place right now. And I think we've had some pretty collaborative pieces that RPS is also on a very aggressive timeline to do some of the same things, right? Understand like, hey, their infrastructure and their facilities and what's the capacity, and trying to understand, right, where students are coming and how that development impacts that. So, for the last few months, we've been working on sharing information of like new development projects. All right, what type of housing units are in there? How many bedrooms do they have? And looking at like, how many students might that then produce for the schools in those particular zones. And so I think being able to share that and have good information there. I think the other piece that's important is in terms of when you look at the schools, we are about half the school population that we were in 1970. And so it may not be, I'll say, distributed even through all the schools throughout the district. And so I think that's one of the challenges in terms of right facilities and capacity, because it is not evenly balanced across the division right now. And so how did we work on that? But the other piece, and in terms of also where we think about households and households that are moving here, most households that are moving here are households of one and households of two. And so unless, some of those households of two could be households with kids. But most cases, and this is like something to show, it's like households that are coming here or moving net new to Richmond don't have school age kids. And so in terms of looking at how that fits in terms of school population, there's been some modest growth, I'll say at the bottom of the chain in terms of like nursery school enrollment is actually up a little bit in terms of where it was in 1970. But for the rest, it's still significantly lower. But
Well, I hope that's considered, because if you're looking at, I'm gonna speak for the NAF district, because that's where I'm at. I grew up in 8th, but my adult life I've been in the NAF district. The schools over there are overpopulated. So when you consider bringing more and making NAF district more dense, the school is gonna be way overpopulated. So when you consider, when you want to build over there with the schools that need more kids going to those buildings, maybe put this houses more. I don't make sound unfair on how to put this, but build over there. And send the kids to those schools. Yeah. No, that's him. Okay, Charlie.
Yeah, about these three items, the church thing, as I'll call it, makes sense. And I think that threads the needle nicely. Not every parcel that a church is on is created equal. Not every neighborhood that a church is in is created equal. This will also be supported by the YIGBY legislation and the permissions granted there. So that makes sense. And it's probably, I imagine it's a little less scary sounding, honestly, than MX3 coming to your church. So I think it should quell some concerns just from a vibe standpoint alone. The ongoing duplex, ADU, single family, et cetera, that conversation. I think this has landed in maybe the best possible place, understanding the circumstances. I have mixed feelings. I'm relatively laissez-faire when it comes to the built environment. I'll just be the first to admit that. And I believe that from a academic place and just my trained expertise as a planner and understanding, the cost benefit of regulations as it pertains to overall housing supply.
What was your expertise again? Planning?
If you could believe it, yeah. So with that, while I might personally be like, oh yeah, you know what? You should be able to tear down a house and build a duplex and an ADU. Like you should be able to do that. Even if I personally believe that, what I also believe is that there are scenarios where it might make just as much economic sense to keep the bones of an existing house, attach another ADU-ish thing to it to make a duplex, and then do another ADU. Like that's just as likely from my construction experience to happen if you already have an embodied usefulness in the existing dwelling. So I think it could, cup half empty. Cup half full. I think it could inspire some creative thinking in how we use existing buildings and in a way that would be inherently less disruptive and more mindful of the embodied carbon of the house itself, right? So I'm okay with it. We've talked I think this should have been renamed the duplex committee. But no, because it's a serious issue, I'm not downplaying it. None of us here are, but I think this is a good olive branch. Can't please everybody, but this is pretty close. And then what else can we talk about? The number of related persons or unrelated persons. I like from an enforcement usefulness standpoint, I like the shift to building code because I think it'll increase the likelihood that people do this the right way. When you say 8 people can be in a house together, you might have abuses of that, right? But if you say you need to tie it to your permitted building occupancy, that inspires the owner of the property to then go through proper channels, right, to learn the answers to those questions. And if they need to update their floor plan, guess what? Now they have to do that in their building permit, which will change in use the occupancy. They'll get a new CO. It's a much more likely to succeed enforcement option than something that just says 8 people can go in a house and then landlord who doesn't know any better, right, might just do whatever to make that happen with less above board activity. I thought speculation, but I can see how this would be useful written this way. And then I'll just add a few more. Those are my thoughts. I can add a few more like musings, I guess, beyond those 3.
Minutes muse.
Minutes and muse. The RKG report, I think, has been great because it does show that this is not a apocalyptic scenario where the sky will fall if this gets approved as shown. It shows actually the predicted use of this new zoning is pretty close roughly to what we currently have already. So I like that. I think we need to remind ourselves of that because there's a lot of fear mongering going on about this whole exercise. Going back to co-op housing, I personally was able to live in a co-op. It's 8 or more unrelated persons, so it's not equal co-op, but I was living in a house in college that had 22 people. It was a co-op. And in this day where people are living so digitally, I found great power in being with other people physically in a space, learning how to exist together. Read Robert Putnam, Anything, about the power of social belonging physically. I think it's a great way to do that. Let's see. That's probably it. Good enough. Thanks.
Timing, Charlie.
Rehearse it.
That's all right, you can have it.
Yeah, so first, I agree with Charlie that I think the current draft is written in maybe a less precise and policy-oriented way than I would like to see. I don't necessarily think it has to be legislation quality, but I'm worried about the inconsistencies and the inapplicable references that he pointed out. And in general, I like things like this to be precise and to use very careful wording to make sure that we're communicating a specific policy outcome rather than I do like accessible language, and I think that there's a middle ground there between legislation and what it is now. For households, I'm a big fan of deferring to the building code. I think including a definition in the zoning code is redundant, and it sounds like a carryover of morality laws rather than actually like getting at something. And I think the people who do the building code are worried about all the same things that a change in household size for the zoning code would also be trying to address. So I think addressing it on both fronts just adds confusion to the mix. Places of worship wise, the more flexibility we can give these buildings, the better. People have said this a lot, but I'm watching a lot of historic church buildings rotting away in Church Hill. They're just sort of sitting there, falling into disuse. And I would love to remove every barrier possible to be them being used for something. So I liked that they were zoned for MX because it seemed more flexible. But if there was a lot of feedback from churches that they didn't want that, then I like the contextual housing oriented version as well. Dwelling units, I prefer, personally, I preferred the draft one definition here without the preservation bonus. I don't think there's a particular value to limiting the number of buildings, except as it affects lot coverage, measurements, other form-based requirements, and those are already addressed in the design standards. So I don't think that adding the unit number limits really adds value for us. And I think it's better to maintain that flexibility. That relates to the ADUs as well. I think the analysis that we saw pretty clearly establishes that it would not have a significant effect in any direction. And so I think it's just erring on the side of flexibility to allow more if it does happen to be economically feasible for a developer. Great, that's incredibly unlikely, as we've seen. But then when it's important with somebody for like multi-generation households or aging in place, for those reasons, it's going to be incredibly important to those people that applies to, which again, very small number of people, it's going to be very important to that very small number of people. And so I think it makes sense to just err on the side of flexibility. And then last comment, I just wanted to throw out that it's been mentioned a couple of times, but tree canopy, old growth tree protections are a huge priority and concern for me and everybody that I talk to about this. And I don't think that that's mutually exclusive to higher densities. I think it dovetails very nicely with higher densities because people are coming to Richmond regardless. And I think putting more people on less impervious surface is also working well for the trees. So that's all I have to say.
This is Casey. Andrew, I agree with a lot of Andrew's sentiments around density. Everybody knows I'm generally pro-density, and I appreciate in some ways the compromise that draft 3 is reaching around allowing for multiple buildings with that little preservation bonus situation kind of happening. Being that folks have shared a lot of and I agree with the folks who tend to be in favor of flexibility, in favor of density. I think my hope is that we can try to think 50 years into the future, which I know is challenging, but I can almost guarantee that the people with the most concerns, fears, and complaints will not be here in 50 years. And as a young person in Richmond, looking at some of the survey results from other young people, like just segmenting out younger people in Richmond from the survey results that we had towards the beginning of this process, a lot of us tend to be pro-density, pro-flexibility, not because we're short-sighted or because we don't think that there will be any drawbacks, but because we understand that even the drawbacks kind of make up for some of the costs that we would incur from over-restricting ourselves when we're hoping that this code can take us into a future that does allow for a Richmond for everyone. So I'm appreciative of solutions that allow and continue to keep flexibility without giving in to fears that there are a lot of other solutions for and ways that we can be creative to solve around without being very restrictive when it comes to the zoning code. Similarly for church buildings, I hope faith leaders understand that the folks who are managing church spaces, the folks who are doing faith-based community development, I hope you understand that the flexibility will allow you probably the most freedom and the most say in what can happen with those buildings that we know are falling empty, falling into disrepair. So the compromise is here for draft 3, sure. And yeah, I hope that it still allows for the flexibility that we need. I think the fact that it is tailored to the needs of particular communities, I can appreciate that. I think I would still be in favor of a little more flexibility, but I recognize the concerns around political expediency. I don't want political expediency to be the enemy of stretching our imaginations to allow for us being daring in addressing housing crises and addressing needs for equity. I don't want beauty to be the enemy of equity. I would hope that between the two, equity could be our priority. But here we are. Family definition, agreeing with Andrew again there, since he came before me. I hear the concerns around family definition, how many people in a dwelling. People are not living together in high density like that without probably some very, very strong motivation and push to do so. I don't think it's something that people are just doing flippantly. And I would hope that our fears are not overshadowing people's very real needs for shelter, for affordable living, for a life that has some modicum of dignity. I know we have concerns. They're valid, and people need to survive. And people need to survive now and 50 years from now. So I think what it's going to take for us is to stretch ourselves and to be a bit daring and to be a bit courageous. And in order to think creatively, yes, there will be problems to solve. Yes, we'll have to figure out what to do about schools. Yes, we should not only encourage density where density is already overcrowding schools. Thank you, Tiffany, for bringing that up. Yeah, I would hope that amongst all of our concerns and priorities, that equity can still stand somewhere towards the top of our priority list. So my comments are in the spirit of that, in hopes that Richmond is a place that can still welcome me 50 years from now.
Folks online, Marianne, can you, Benny, if you're still with us, Marianne, unmute you, and you have 5 minutes to offer comments, questions on Director Boggs' presentation. Okay. Benny,
Hi, can you guys hear me?
no, that's not Benny. Okay. Let's see Benny. Okay, Melissa, we'll move over to you.
Okay, can y'all hear me?
Welcome.
Okay, thank you. Okay, first of all, I just want to make the procedural point that the communities that I represent in the 2nd District, we do not agree with a number of the items that have been indicated as major agreement. You know, we are not on board necessarily with lot coverage, height, setbacks, and lot splits. Those are things that I think are very important to us as dense urban neighborhoods. And I just want to just put that on the table as a point. With respect to the definition of family, there is a lot of concern in a lot of the communities that I represent about the ability to do single room occupancy of right. And there are a number of reasons for that. These communities often bear sort of a disproportionate burden of these party houses based on the proximity to VCU. And that's not just places like Jackson Ward and Carver and the Fan, that's also Oregon Hill and Randolph. So I think what I'm hearing from the constituents that I represent is that they believe family should stay defined as it is. And this is exactly the kind of project that a community should have input in. So it would be appropriate for that type of project to be subject to an SUP. So that's with respect to family. With respect to churches, I have heard quite a bit from both Jackson Ward and Carver, and the concerns are there's a difference if the property is developed by the church themselves, or what we seem to more often see when the property is just sold at market rate to a developer. So I think we have some hesitation and just want to better understand how that's going to work. Not going to say we're for it, we're against it. I think right now the state statute we can get comfortable with, but I want to understand how much further what's being proposed would go. And then the structures on a parcel, I think we certainly favor the preservation bonus. We think that retaining that is important. What remains critically important to a lot of these communities is protections for historic properties. And while the preservation bonus works and is great for single family parcels, we still have issues when you're upzoning properties to RM. So we're going to need to really kind of dig down in that with this next map and better understand how that's going to work on the ground. I think that's it. Did I lose anybody?
Was Maritza able to unmute herself?
She should be able to.
Hey, Maritza, welcome.
Let's see if this works. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for letting me join virtually. Kind of taking them in order on the three things that are presented, I think it would be kind of going to Philip Hart's comments, you know, going in the middle and like 5 or 6 for the household size. I don't like having it be determined by building codes. I think it could end up with like tons of people in a house with that size in the building code. On the church change, I think that is a good change, and I'm supportive of it. And then on the duplexes and like just a lot of the conversations I've heard about allowing kind of more than one housing type on a lot. I just want to share a little bit of like personal information and just what that looks like. So on my screen, you'll see this is a presentation I gave at the Branch Museum 2 years ago. And this is the house that my mom took me to when I was born in Watertown, Massachusetts. And we were renters on the bottom floor. And the house was owned by the couple who lived above us. And so you can see this little diagram, you know, 2 households living in one house. And like my mom and me are in green. She's a single mom and I'm her only child. And so I know it's really atypical to like a lot of people's upbringing, but I moved around a lot as a child. So I lived in, how many is this? 14 different housing types from birth to adult to like 18 in Puerto Rico, where I'm from, and in Massachusetts. And you can see like the varying number of households that lived in those types. And then like how my mom and I were able to like afford different places. And so one of the places that we lived was a house, another house that was shared, and we lived on the ground floor and like 3 single men lived on the upstairs floor, and it was 2 different units. That was great because we were able to live in like a really leafy green neighborhood within a really good school district. And so as you guys think about all of this, like, just remember that these are people who are wanting to like make a life and live in different communities. And so just think about like, it's really not that scary necessarily to have, you know, 2 households or 2 housing types on a lot, maybe 3. It just kind of creates more opportunities for different types of people who might have kind of unconventional households from the typical nuclear American family to experience our city and our neighborhoods. And I can share those slides with the planning staff if we want to put them anywhere.
That'd be great. Thanks, Maritza. Any other comments? Okay, Benny Gates, are you not online anymore? Okay. Benny, if for some reason you're online and just can't hear us, just raise your hand or contact staff and we'll get back to you. All right, Preston.
Great, thank you. Preston Lloyd. I'm going to address each of the three questions, but to offer some context on the framing of how I address each one, and this is an inheritance from the Richmond 300 deliberation process. It's understanding sort of what are the goals of Richmond 300 and the big move that Kevin helped to summarize really effectively is his presentation at the beginning of the meeting. And then also looking at from the standpoint of if we're trying to lessen the regulatory barriers to production of new housing, providing new transparency about where we want it to go and in what form it can go. How do we do that in a way that has a countervailing sensitivity to existing neighborhood context? And those two things can exist at the same time. We can be sensitive to existing neighborhoods while also trying to drive better outcomes and lessening the regulatory burden that allows for greater production of housing. And that has a corresponding lowering of cost of housing. We all acknowledge that affordable housing is a laudable goal. It's a big part of what we're trying to do. It's not going to fix everything, but I think that's the framing that I address each of these questions. So if there's a question that is going to be very controversial and yet isn't actually calculated to likely, and it's controversial because it has a perception of threatening the existing context of existing neighborhoods. And it doesn't actually stand to generate more units. And some of the economic analysis that PDR has commissioned offers some context on like, what are the things that are actually going to move the needle and what are things that might make a difference, but they're probably not kind of the highest and best policy objectives from that specific standpoint, production of new housing. So when we look at how many people in a household, I don't see that one as being one that is going to, on its own, significantly increase the production of new housing, but it does deserve some clarification. And yet, I think we've also heard that there's a lot of sensitivity, especially in certain neighborhoods, as to that issue, concerns about rooming houses, sort of the historic context there. So to me, the draft 3 proposal, while it makes intuitive sense, I think having just a clear standard on where everyone knows where to draw the line is probably the better way to go. So I think I'm persuaded to Philip's point about, all right, if 8 is too much, 4 is too little, let's find something in the middle there. Second, with how we zone places of worship, I really like where staff has landed with a contextual option. My only caveat to that is that I think that's inconsistent with what the faith and housing legislation proposes that will go into effect next year. And specifically under the Faith and Housing Act, local zoning would be preempted in 4 specific ways for qualifying properties. So if it's a nonprofit or a place of worship, then from a height standpoint, the statute mandates that local ordinances allow heights of at least 45 feet. From a density standpoint, it would permit a minimum of 20 units per acre or the most intensive existing residential unit density within 500 feet. That's going to be greater than the lower end of some of the contextual options that staff presented. And then from a parking standpoint, that one wouldn't apply because Richmond doesn't have those. And setbacks would allow setbacks of 10 feet or the smallest setback allowed for any existing property within 500 feet. So again, I'm sort of making some inferences based on the very limited information we have as to how that legislation will apply when it goes into effect. But what I would hate to see is for us to stand up a regime that's been heavily negotiated and we've made commitments to the community, and then we have to change the rules because the state law requires a greater density in those instances. So just sort of a caveat to that option. And then the third, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the 2+1 proposal, and I really appreciate all the effort by staff to try and figure out how to incorporate what's been a really robust engagement from the community on this. So much so that it's actually been frustrating as a ZAC member. I'm like, can we please stop talking about duplexes? But it's been illustrative to me that that's really what the public is focused on. And the 2+1 means that the +1 has an element of understanding how accessory dwelling units are going to work. And we're still new to the accessory dwelling unit game. We've only had that for less than 2 years. And I think we're still understanding the practical impact of, is that actually generating new housing supply? And is it something that's calculated to move the needle? Along with the countervailing conversation about duplexes. So my preference would be understanding how much engagement there's been on that and how much concern there remains in the public, that we try to take a wait and see approach on that particular policy question. And we allow ourselves the time to adopt code refresh without a change in the number of units. And I very much would like to see that addressed eventually, but I would like to have more time to evaluate it. So sorry for running 50 seconds over, but those are my positions.
Fine. I share a lot of what Preston has said and others. I think the church proposal is a good compromise and I'm comfortable with that. Preston does raise some valid points about being in compliance with the faith and housing legislation. So as long as we're setting up a program that doesn't put us in conflict with that, I think you found a good compromise otherwise. The number of unrelated people in a building, I think it's completely, it's not enforceable. I mean, I think it would take so much manpower to try to enforce that. But there definitely is concern. And when we had this conversation at Planning Commission, I said I was comfortable with the building code because that is definitely looking at it from a health and safety lens. Having more conversation and hearing more, I definitely think 3 is too little in light of, multi-generational housing, people pairing up. I did as a renter, lived with like 5 people at one time. So I think we need to be mindful of people's housing choices. 8 is too much. So I do like kind of as Philip and Preston have said, maybe in the middle, if we have to land on a number. Otherwise, I'm comfortable with the building code. What I've had the most heartburn over is the 2+1 duplex ADU proposal. As a city resident, I don't care. If you want to build a duplex in your backyard, go for it. In fact, most of the houses in my neighborhood have such large additions, they might as well be a second dwelling, and there's barely any yards. It does not bother me. But this has been something that's been very contentious across the city. The 2 years that the ZAC has been here, I've been to many public meetings in all areas of the city, and there's just overwhelming opposition to it. Some of it, I think, is it's because people have been misleading on what this could do to neighborhoods. I think the RKG study that this showed that this is not going to turn Windsor Farms into Scott's Addition. But at the same time, I think that there is a lot of opposition to it. And I'm at the point where I think there's too many positive things in code refresh. We have got, 70% of our units that are non-conforming across the city. We really need to think about driving density to nodes and corridors where we can get some good density and where the density can be supported. There's tree canopy, all other things that citizens have been asking for. I don't want to see us get hung up on a proposal that's going to bring in so few units. And that's again what the RKG proposal said, that we slow down the progress of code refresh as a whole. So like Preston, I would like to maybe pull that piece back. Let's study it a little more and keep the bigger, prize of overhauling our zoning code, which is so desperately needed moving forward, and give the ADUs a little bit more time to work. This is not me being against density. It's just there seems to be a lot of concern with this, and I don't want to see that hold up us moving the entire zoning ordinance forward. And I will just say my piece. Aside from those 3 topics, I agree with everything that Brian has mentioned about design standards. I think I'm glad that staff is taking a look at that. While I 100% support tree canopy and believe that we need tree canopy rules, regulations, we should be replacing trees that we take down. I do object to being told what to do on my property. So if I'm going to do an addition or a renovation, I may not want extra trees. It may not be, I think it's one thing to require it as part of new development, or when you're clearing lot, you should absolutely be replacing that. But telling a homeowner, you just put on an addition and now you need 3 extra trees, I have an objection of going that direction. So I would hope that would be looked at. But that's it for me.
Can I just
close this out?
jump in? And I know I gotta be short. It's kind of not giving your time. Just a little clarity, I think, on the places of worship. Just because I think I want to be clear in terms of like what this is and what this isn't. I think it's reference to House Bill 1279, which is adopted. And in short, it says if religious organization or nonprofit entity that's owned the land for 5 years and they want to do affordable housing, I think it's 60 for rental, right? 60% at 80% AMI or 120% if it's for sale. Can basically go to, I'll just say like RMC by right, which is like multifamily up to 4 stories, not contextual, by right if they're doing that. And so what we looked at is, you know, from Richmond 300 and also from like, right, because these are generally larger parcels in the neighborhoods, they offered opportunities to do something different in terms of both housing products and I think, I mean, it's not here, nano nodes, right? And like a little commercial there. The affordability also allows up to 30% of the first floor to be commercial. So it could be significantly larger than RM A and B are 1,500 square feet. C is 3,000 square feet. So like neighborhoods are in commercial. The reason we zoned this is saying, look, this would apply for like market rate. You could do affordable, but like there's some options there for housing products. The city is and probably will be looking at, there is the opportunity, this ordinance or the Code of Virginia takes effect January 1 of next year. This municipality can preempt it with their own ordinance. I will say like this is what's being proposed is not it. There would probably have to be something different. And I think that's one of the things in terms of, you know, when this group talks about certainty, and I think neighborhood talking about certainty is that is, okay, could we work on something that if it is zoned RMA by right now, could we offer up something that says, okay, if you're going to do affordability, you could go to RMB. And again, maybe it's not the 4-story building, but you could still potentially get the same number of units in a context that I think is better for the neighborhood. So it still fulfills the intent of the state legislation. But I want to be clear, like what we're proposing here is not meant to satisfy that requirement. There would probably be something more that's needed if the city decides to move forward with that approach.
Well, this is my 3rd day in a row having this dance.
Meet again.
Yeah. And I want to thank Kevin, Marianne, and all of the staff for all of the hours and work that you've put in. And I hope that you feel appreciated for the work that you have done. I respect the fact that these are hard decisions and personal desires as well as desires for the community can be challenging to feel as if we're being responsive to them. And at the end of the day, it will be council that makes the tough decision. And hopefully we won't have to go through 2 years of public hearing to get there. And so it is important that I appreciate the effort that's being made to get to a place of some feeling of consensus. And congratulations on where you think that you are right now with that, and hopefully we are. And I want to thank everybody that served on this, serving on this council and the hours that you put in. And I want you to feel valued by the hours that you put in, that it's going to turn out to be worth your time. On the 3 subject matters that we are speaking of, I think as it relates to households, I think a safe place to go. That would be uniform and that we can use building codes to make a determination would be the best way to go about it rather than any particular number. For churches, I know that there are a lot of churches in the city. I mean, we've got a lot of churches. I do like the recommendations that you've made based on the locations of the churches and how they fit into a neighborhood and what would be optional. Appreciate Preston's comments as it relates to the state regulations, even though we may not have to have that at this time in the code. I think we'd be foolish not to weigh in what what has already proposed, because January 1st is really just around the corner. So we certainly don't want to ignore that and make sure we're in compliance with that, whatever we recommend for the churches. But I do know that there are a lot of churches that are underutilized. Some of them are vacant, and so I think a reasonable opportunity for them to become additional housing in the community is very important. How many buildings on a lot? So we recently adopted an SUP in my neighborhood. Tongue in cheek, I voted to support more units than I felt reasonably comfortable with, but based on the current zoning, I felt that that was the best of the options that were available. Everybody knows where Ellen Robertson stands when it comes to affordable housing. I think that it should be worth our time to spend more time really talking about what is affordable housing. I think there are misunderstandings about what is affordable housing. And I think that the perception of affordable housing is wrong in the mindsets of a lot of people. And for many folk, I think that, like Ms. Overton has mentioned so many times, young people. I've lived in homes that had they were Reuben houses. When I first moved to Richmond and was in school and was anxious to move. But, I do think that there are Richmond is expected to be home for homelessness in the region. So opportunities for affordable units and places where people are living in by code, I think would allow us to build more community and have a decent supply of housing choices for folk at the income level that we're willing to pay them. If we're not willing to pay custodians that work for the city of Richmond no more than, $10,000 a year, $15,000 a year, then we should also be willing to provide housing at that cost that they can afford to live as well. They're decent enough to clean up our homes and go clean up our office. They're decent enough to live in our communities. So.
And not in projects, a nice apartment.
And in a decent housing, yes, decent housing. I do get concerned about reconcentration of density in neighborhoods that we have unfortunately concentrated multifamily housing and created isolation and separation. I do think this is an opportunity for Richmond to become a much more friendlier place. And I know my time is gone, but I wanted to go back to something that someone said earlier about when you look at the old maps and there were smaller duplexes for units of houses at 20 units and so forth. I was riding through the West End just the other day. And it's amazing how many small multifamily buildings. What we don't want to say is that was also during the time that it was written into the code that certain people were not allowed to live in those homes. So yeah, it was very acceptable because it was restricted. That my family, I couldn't move in it because the code and the deed fenced me out. I think Richmond have come and grown up enough that we can learn from the quality of the diversity of housing choices in all neighborhoods. We do not have to have code restrictions or deed restrictions that say that certain people can't live in their neighborhood. So we've come a long way, and I'm encouraged that we will get across the line and we will get this adopted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Robertson, and thank everyone for taking the time to provide some feedback to Director Bonk. I hope that we had some time for open conversation as we have a little over 15 minutes left, but putting staff on the spot here, I've been getting questions from ZAC members as well as others, is what is the continuing role of the ZAC, particularly as we're approaching draft 3. While I love our monthly meetings, many of us have been here for 2 years, and in my personal opinion, not speaking for anyone else, at some point we have to turn this document over to the decision makers. So I think it would be helpful if staff has any indication on next steps to share that with the group so that we know what's expected of us going forward. And then if there's anything you wanted to respond to that you heard, please. Where's yours? If that's okay with the group.
Sure, thank you. Just to address, I think Councilor Robertson's comments about affordability, I think it's important for us to state, what this code can do and what it can't do. It's important to talk about, right, what zoning in general can do and what it can't do. And it can't do everything. And then one of the things, I've talked about too, is in terms of when we have the discussion about, congregate living and household living, unfortunately, you can't zone for like good management. And so we've had, and just looking at my code enforcement side in our team, we've had many places where we have 8 individuals living in a household together and don't bother anyone, don't ever get a report or call on anything. And we've had households that have 3 people in them, and they are on our list, we know their address and we're out there all the time. And so, and again, I think I appreciate that in terms of again, how can we, to the best of our ability, work into the nuance of the code, some things that, again, fulfill the objectives and also are able to be, move forward, that we can have some definition with that. The affordability piece too, I think is important. And that is, I think, in terms of what a code can do, and we had this presentation yesterday at our land use committee, is the cost to build something in Richmond today. A lot of that cost is tied up in holding cost, and it's tied up in waiting for a rezoning, or more likely a special use permit. And so if a code can say, all right, you can do something by right instead of having to go through a special use permit, to me, that's a way, to be able to reduce cost. And when you look, and 1/3 of our special use permits over the last 5 years, 1/3 were for a single family dwelling units. That's a lot of time, just to build a house. And so to me, that is not helping affordability by making somebody go through this process to build something. And again, the only reason they're there is because they've been zoned out because they don't have a wide enough lot. Well, neither do their neighbors, and they're just late to the party. And so I think by looking at moving things, again, with some certainty from a special use to by right is important. And then the other thing, the code in terms of the ability to just do different housing products. And I think that's why we've looked at talking about the ADU, or why we've talked about the duplex and other things. So yeah, there's a reason we've had this discussion in terms of just the ability for housing products to exist in different parts of the city. And I think doing so in a way that, again, and going back and making sure that it respects, as we've talked, Richmond 300, where are those housing products? So getting that balance together. And so I think, as mentioned, our goal is to take some of these things, if you've got other things you didn't think about today, and just, think as soon as you get home, you can email myself, Mary Ann, to put this into a fuller draft 3. With that, I do believe that there's some, I'll say, consensus from our team and administration that we would like draft 3 to be the version that moves through the process. In terms of ultimately, our staff is going to make a recommendation to our city planning commission. Our city planning commission will ultimately make a recommendation to city council, and city council will be deciding what's done. And so I think we are working towards the end of our time on the zoning advisory committee. Again, I want to make sure that we're referring this with planning commission, because this is a body of planning commission. And so just to have that discussion officially at planning commission to decide, hey, do you think, we're at a place to be able to move forward with that? So I will just say, if we have ice cream at the next meeting, then that may be a sign that things are winding down. But with that, I really want to express sincere appreciation for all the time and effort you put in here. And I hope your work is appreciated. And I hope you don't read like the comments, on social media too much, because I feel like this body has been able to provide like so much expertise from like so many different perspectives. Like, okay, well, what does this really mean? And being able to get into the weeds has been very helpful and thoughtful. And, you know, being able to look at it from, you know, 24 different directions, I think is helpful for us in terms of like, yep, didn't think about that. We need to do that. And so we've been able to catch some things through this process. And so I just, yeah, want to express my appreciation for that. And yeah, with that, we will probably be working on sunset so that you are not confined to this for forever. So we can move on. And I think, you know, like I said at the beginning, we're just looking to get to some answers of something that we feel like we can move forward and continue that conversation with those bodies.
And I appreciate everything you and your staff have done, and I echo the comments of how much work this group has put in. And I do hope that you haven't paid too much mind to the nonsense on social media and folks about the ZAC. And we're not 14 builders that have written the code. Fortunately, I hate to burst that bubble, but I'm a single builder on here. Oh, Brian, you're multifamily, but so I think it's been a tremendous amount of work. Grateful, and I have enjoyed meeting with everyone. And I don't think today's gonna be our last meeting, but as Director Vonk said, we will be winding down, and this last draft will be the one that goes forward to the decision-making bodies. But that doesn't mean that you can't continue to, you know, provide comments beyond the ZAC meetings. So we still do have some time. So does anyone, yeah, Tiffany.
Tiffany Gunn. I know I came late to join ZAC. But I know there were different avenues as far as getting information out about Co-Refresh. But I still think there's not enough information. Whether I'm at the grocery store, fast food, beauty supply, whatever, I always talk about Co-Refresh. People are clueless. I think whatever we decide to do, there are going to be a lot of surprise, upset, some happy people in the city of Richmond. It's going to be an uproar. A lot of people still don't know, and I normally go to all my town hall meetings. I'm very talkative. Y'all may not know it. I'm kind of late to this, but I'm very talkative. And whatever opportunity I get to promote or encourage people to come to our town hall meetings for the National District, I do. And in that conversation, I always talk about Co-Refresh. And I talk to people that work for the city of Richmond. They work for the city of Richmond. I think it's going to be a big uproar regardless. People have no idea what's going on. I don't know how to get the message out.
Yeah.
First Charlie, second Charlie.
Yeah, but I think people generally understand zoning. I mean, not the detail. Right?
Yeah. They don't know about the program.
The problem with Co-Refresh is that, particularly in dealing with the single family residential neighborhoods like talking, it's really a radical change. And they're not aware of that. Or when they become aware of it, it's like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that's, you know, they may in the end go along with it or something, but it's because it's zoning. We've had zoning in this country for well over a century now. And there's always a certain traditional way it's done. This is not traditional. And you can argue whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. But I think that's why people aren't aware of Co-Refresh. They just figure maybe it's another zoning.
People only become aware of zoning when they want to build something on their yard. Then it's an okay zone, but it's everywhere. Only because I go to the town hall meetings, I'm aware. There are a lot of people in my neighborhood joining them. They have no idea about Co-Refresh, that we're doing this, that we're meeting, that things are about to change. They have no idea.
Yeah, this is Charlie Wilson. Yeah, I think there are definitely people who show up to meetings who are curious, have opinions, good and bad about the whole exercise. I think we need to remind ourselves that this is a city of 230,000 people. There are a lot of people who show up almost every time. Thank you for doing that. But there are plenty of people who aren't showing up, and I've got a wide swath of friends and neighbors, et cetera, different walks of life. A lot of them don't actively even think about zoning, and the world just happens around them and they just move on with their life. I think that's more of our city than we care to realize. And honestly, I think with our current zoning that we have, if you surveyed the entire city and asked them explain your current zoning that applies to your neighbor, like your neighborhood. People wouldn't know where to begin, right? So this is an inherent change. People are not generally, it's one of the things I learned academically in planning. It's a high response bias of concerns that show up to public meetings. And there's a reason for that, right? Not saying good or bad reason, but there is a reason for that. So if we're talking about the greater good, and if we're talking about deferring to planning experts, such as those on our staff and the citizens who do have a seat at the table here, a seat in the public, this is just how it's done. And I don't think that any of this is like, while it might be a surprise to people, I don't think that indicates this was done poorly either. So it's tough. I get it. And I'm always happy to talk to my friends about it, whether they want to or not. So, yeah.
I think did you have a comment? I have a comment from Maritza and then Andrew, and then we'll go back to Charlie.
I just wanted to comment that there will be a change in the law, but that doesn't mean that like there's going to be a sudden change in how everything looks. In fact, that probably will not happen. And so that was showed through the analysis that the consultant did, that like we really aren't going to see, especially in single family neighborhoods, we're not going to see a huge amount of change. It will probably be not very noticeable. And so just like be aware of that with the zoning code when it passes. It's not like the world's all of a sudden going to change. And also another point, and I think Councilwoman Robertson brought this up at our last meeting, is that we're never done with any of these things. They're never perfect because it's a bunch of humans and we're all rather imperfect beings. And so we are creating the document. So I'm sure there will be, after the zoning ordinance is adopted, I'm sure there will be amendments to the zoning ordinance. And that's just normal course of business. And in fact, we've been amending the zoning ordinance many times since the last one was adopted in 1972. So I just wanted to share those two thoughts. Things aren't going to change right away. And we will continue to amend the zoning ordinance in the future.
Thanks, Maritza. Andrew?
This is Andrew Bunn. Actually, Charlie ended up saying most of what I was going to say after I raised my hand, so I'll mostly echo what you said. But then I also wanted to just sort of add, most people don't think about zoning, and I think the vast majority of people should never have to. I think good government and good governance and policy writing is when you design a policy structure that reflects a world that allows people to mostly live their lives the way they want to without having to read a technical document in order to define what exactly they are and aren't allowed to do. I think a huge portion of this refresh is largely updating things to match what the world looks like right now in the real world. So I also firmly agree with Maritza that we're not going to see a dramatic change to the city from this. And I think in the grand scheme of things, I've been impressed with the outreach and the process that the refresh has gone through, especially building directly on the national award-winning process and outreach of Richmond 300. So yeah, I think about that a lot. So I wanted to add that as well.
This is Charlie Manges. This isn't what I was going to talk about, but in view of what we've been saying here, let me first say that I agree that the change is going to be gradual, and it's not going to be, you're just not going to see mass changes in residential neighborhoods. But keep in mind that in a single family neighborhood, if somebody builds a duplex right next to you, that's going to be noticed. So it may not be a lot of them, but it's going to be noticed. And that's, I think, the concern we have to have. But what I really was going to mention or talk about was the timing. You're saying, we can kind of be done with this before too long. It's fine by me if we can, but I'm not sure I see how that's really possible anytime soon, because we've got to see draft 3. We're not going to see it till mid-July or something. Is that?
See how long comments trickle in.
Okay.
I'll say I've been working on these. We've been working on it in the background.
And I hope as part of that, you're also going to fix the language that needs to be fixed throughout the document. And so I think this could easily, I mean, Patty Merrill said, maybe we'll get to a draft 4. I can easily see that, depending on how many changes are made in draft 3. So again, I'm happy to leave whenever, but I just think it's not realistic to talk about that right now.
It's not up to me how much longer we continue. It's this group was formed as a subcommittee of the planning commission, so it'll be in consultation with the planning commission and staff. But I know that there is a desire to kind of, again, get this document into the decision-making bodies, but like you, I don't know what's gonna happen with draft 3. I just wanted staff to give some idea of what their thought process is as of now for the future of the ZAC going forward, because I've been asked and I don't know how to answer that because I don't make the agendas and control the ZAC despite what social media says, so.
Brief comment, and this was not one of the 3 categories that was raised, so I didn't address it in my 5 minutes. But to me, I think one of the things that'll be a litmus test as to whether this was successful, the code refresh effort was successful in meeting the mandate that the Big Move said we were charged with doing as part of the Richmond 300 plan. It's going to come down to whether the development standards make this a regulatory document that can be navigated without becoming more burdensome on development than our current code. If we have a checklist of 100 and some items rather than a checklist of 12 items that now need to be reviewed by agency reviewers as they go through the process because all of these new standards have been codified, I think that we will have missed the mark. And I'll commend the director and Mary Ann. I know that they're working diligently to ensure that we hit the right balance, that we both hit the policy objectives that we've all talked about, tree preservation, et cetera, but that we do so in a way that facilitates a streamlined process from a regulatory standpoint. And so I'm looking forward to seeing the next draft to make sure that we've moved in a more positive direction than the last one.
All right, well, it's 6:29 and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So thank you for the presentation, your continued work, the robust conversation. Just as a reminder, we are scheduled to reconvene the ZAC on July 8th at 4 p.m. here in the 5th floor conference room. So we will wait direction for staff on that upcoming agenda. And with that, I think we're adjourned.
I work in the Fulbright Library.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, so we work.